Order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 1.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the BBC is a hugely valued institution, and the midterm review seeks to ensure it continues to provide an outstanding service by improving its processes, both in relation to impartiality and complaints. I meet with the BBC Chair and the Director General regularly, and I will continue to use these meetings to raise these important issues.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I started my own career as a BBC reporter, and I believe very firmly in the importance of our national broadcaster being both independent, particularly at moments such as this and eras such as this, but also being completely impartial. However, every year many people complain that the BBC is not as impartial as it should be, even that it is biased, and the BBC then dismisses the vast majority of those complaints itself. I wonder then if my right honourable friend thinks that perhaps the public would have more confidence in the way those complaints are investigated if they were carried out independently from the outset.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The public expects, and rightly expects, the BBC to be an exemplar in relation to impartiality. And in our review, we highlight issues both in relation to impartiality and in relation to complaints. And as a result of that review, the BBC will undertake significant reforms in relation to both impartiality and complaints. And at Charter Review, I have already said we will examine whether BBC First remains the right complaints model.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My innate lack of deference has probably not got me far in this place in the last 22 years, but can I just say how good it is to see you in your rightful place this morning? Mr. Speaker, the BBC is a great institution, as a great British institution, as the Secretary of State has said. And can she reflect, in considering the midterm review, on the importance in this era of fake news, of biased comment, of social media and so on, that we have a space which is where information is presented and news is presented according to editorial guidelines in an impartial way, criticised from the left and from the right, which probably reflects the fact that the BBC generally gets it right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable friend is absolutely right that the BBC plays a critical role, and it is extremely trusted, not just here, across the world, and it is an important institution. But that is why it is so important that it remains impartial, and I know that the Director General agrees with me on that. I know that the Director General thinks, like I do, that there is more to do, and that's why in the midterm review we set out things that the BBC continues to need to look at. The BBC agreed with us and has accepted all our recommendations in the midterm review.
Glenn Saxby.
Question 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I shall answer questions 2, 3 and 8 together. The Government has delivered the legal framework for a registration scheme for short-term lets in England through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act and has consulted on the design of the scheme. On Monday, we announced we will implement a national mandatory registration scheme across all of England. We will set out further detail on how the register will operate later in the year.
Glenn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. And can I also thank the Secretary of State for her engagement on this issue now and in her previous role as Housing Minister. It is great news that there will be a mandatory short-term let register, which will hopefully begin to relieve some of the pressure on our local housing market. Can I ask my honourable friend how we can ensure that North Devon's tourist economy fully benefits from these changes?
Baker.
Well, my honourable friend is a real champion of her local Devon tourist economy, and she's also aware of the challenges that can present in the local community, especially when it comes to short-term lets, which can make it also too expensive for people who are working in the tourism industry to live nearby to their jobs. So this is a difficult issue where we're trying to strike the right balance between people being able to have second homes and also being able to make sure that hotels have a level playing field and that there is the right accommodation for the local community. So I appreciate her campaigning on this issue. In the next phase of the project, we'll be working with the sector to get the details of the registration scheme right. We'll be reaching out to representatives of the visitor economy and likely users of the scheme to make sure it delivers for everybody in the simplest way possible.
Duncan Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Norfolk also has significant numbers of holiday lets and Airbnbs and the like. And I'm glad the Minister says that we look at this sort of in moderation, because like everything in life, too much of anything can always sometimes be a bad thing. So there is a difference, a nuance, between someone perhaps who is renting out a room in an Airbnb to earn some extra income in their home, and whole streets of areas that are turned into holiday lets. Can the Minister assure me that we will look at the nuances on this properly?
Minister.
I can provide him with that assurance. We are aware that the proliferation of short-term lets has caused real concern in communities like this, like his. It's not something that we want to clamp down on in a way that's going to make life difficult for people that rent their rooms out on a very irregular basis. But this, as he says, when it's whole streets causing a problem, we think that the most important thing is we get an understanding of the scale of the problem. And what our scheme is designed to do is to give us that data, and then next steps can be taken after that.
Bob Blackman. Not here. Del Zankner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cambridge has long suffered from the antisocial behaviour problems associated with short-term lets, and Cambridge City Council has long asked for action. So I welcome what I think is a long overdue announcement. Could the Minister say more about enforcement and the resources needed for councils to enforce so that we can actually deal with the antisocial behaviour problems that sadly too often come with these short-term lets?
I thank Minister for raising the issues of Cambridge City, and I can appreciate that in a city like that there would have been significant problems in this area. He may be aware that this was a joint announcement with the Department for Levelling Up. We are there to put the mandatory register together, which gives us the data that local authorities can then use, but it will be for them to look at some of the powers that will be able to be implemented to deal with some of these antisocial behaviour problems that he cites.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister for those answers? Minister, tourism and the short-term lets are very important for my constituency of Strangford. I understand the issues very clearly. There are benefits, they're not all negatives, and it's important that the positives are marked up as well. So can I ask the Minister a very simple question? Now we have a reactivated Northern Ireland Assembly on the go and working hard. Can I ask the Minister if some of the ideas that she has as Minister on this very issue could be shared with the Northern Ireland Assembly, and in particular with the Council and my constituency of Strangford? Thank you.
I thank him for his intervention. Unfortunately, on the point of substance, somebody coughed, and I slightly missed what the key question was. So I do apologise for that. But I think he's asking me about sharing expertise on this with Northern Ireland, and we should be very, very happy to do so, because it's important to learn the lessons of how this is being applied across the country. In Labour-run Wales, there is a real mess in relation to how to deal with the issue of holiday accommodation, and similarly in Scotland, we want to learn those lessons in the English scheme, and we should be very, very happy to share the lessons with Northern Ireland.
Mary Glindon.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government launched 3 consultations following the Gambling White Paper, and we are currently considering all the evidence that was received and will publish the Government response soon. Our response to the consultation on the introduction of online slots limit is due to be published imminently, and we're on track for implementation of the recommendations by the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister ensure that the highly regulated land-based industry is able to better innovate and grow by, for example, ensuring the right option is chosen on the changes proposed to machine rules for the adult gaming sector that are currently out for consultation?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right that the rules for land-based sector have been very out of date for some time, and that's why I think actually doing these consultations has been really helpful. It's identified further work that needed to be done, and we've done a second consultation on some of that, but again we'll still be on course for implementing the changes by the summer.
Shadow Secretary of State Thangyun Debona.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The unregulated black market for gambling causes untold devastation in people's lives, even when they're trying to quit. So what is the government doing to protect families from the illegal black market in gambling?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely
Minister.
right to highlight the dangers of the black market, and that is why, as part of the White Paper, we said that we would give more powers to the Gambling Commission to be able to close down those black market websites that are really, frankly, quite dangerous.
Holderburn.
5, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's interest in the Cultural Development Fund. The application process for its 4th round is live, so ministers are unfortunately unable to meet with bid promoters at present.
Holderburn.
2 remarkably talented and enthusiastic individuals from Kettering, Becky Hurrell and Lindsay Atkins, have put together a really ambitious £2 million bid to repurpose the former Gala Bingo Hall in Kettering High Street into a community arts, music and family hub, which would be transformative for Kettering Town Centre. Expressions of interest in the department's Cultural Development Fund must be submitted by the 15th of March. Is there no way that myself, Becky, Lindsay and the Council could meet with the relevant Minister before the 15th of March to see if our bid might be appropriate?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I should like to congratulate the two women that he talks about who are putting forward such an exciting and interesting bid. It's an important building in Kettering High Street. In preparation for this debate, for this oral questions, I looked at a potted history of Kettering Bingo Hall, and I appreciate what an important role it has to play in regenerating the town. I spoke to my noble friend Lord Parkinson about this. He is the Minister for this area. He should be very happy to meet. There's just a question about the appropriate timing of that, and we will be very happy to look into it. I also noted the levelling up debate you had recently. I very much hope that this is a successful bid, but I'm afraid I cannot influence it.
Helen Morgan.
Number 6, please, sir.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, leisure centres provide important community hubs, connect individuals within areas in which they live and help to deliver important social and mental health outcomes. And in recognition of this and public leisure, that is why we provided £60 million to swimming pools across England.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Whitchurch swimming pool in my constituency closed in March 2020, and while spades in the ground, thankfully, to reopen it in the coming years, the Council announced last week that swimming pools and leisure centres would be at the top of its list for significant budget cuts in the coming year. I'm really concerned that given the lack of public transport, that young people won't be able to learn to swim and that the wider community will lose access to a healthy lifestyle in the leisure centres that we've offered. I wonder if the Minister would be able to meet with me to discuss how we ensure that people in a very stretched out rural area might be able to access those leisure centres going forward.
Minister.
Well, this is precisely why we provided that funding for swimming pools, because we recognised that there were particular challenges for them given the high energy bills. But more broadly, we are providing over £300 million worth of support for facilities up and down the country, and that will include in many rural areas, because it will be helping us to get more people active, which is a key strand of our sports strategy, get active.
Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend be willing to meet me to discuss the challenges faced by those leisure centres in local authority areas like Shropshire, where they are facing budgetary pressures? There may be other opportunities. He's mentioned the swimming pool fund, but there may be other things that can be done to sustain these vital resources for local people, including in South Shropshire.
Yeah.
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, it sounds like I need to have a cross-Shropshire meeting to discuss facilities in the area. But this is precisely why we have been really clear about the funding that we provided for swimming pools, but also, as part of our strategy, we are going to do a facilities piece of work to understand where are the sort of black spots where we need to do more work in terms of providing more facilities and what those facilities should be to address the local needs as part of that determination to get more people active.
Liz Twist.
Question 7, Mr Speaker.
The Government has invested millions of pounds to support charities across England with the cost of living pressures. That includes the £76 million Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund, which has now awarded all funding to frontline services helping vulnerable households.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Charities across my constituency in Blaydon do an amazing job in supporting people and communities in what are really difficult times. But today, a triple threat of rising costs, falling income and higher demand has created what the NCVO call a cost of giving crisis, with half of all charities saying they're at full capacity and some having to turn people away. What further steps can the Government take to ensure that charities can continue with that vital work?
Minister.
Well, I recognise the position that charities face, because having been a head of fundraising in a charity myself, I know that you often face those situations where your donations fall at the minute that you need to help more people. That is why we provided £100 million in funding, but equally we've added another £76 million from dormant assets to help charities in this difficult situation.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on Monday, it was a privilege to speak at the launch of the State of the Sector report. This report found charities are propping up government services by £2.4 billion per year. So could the Minister tell me why the party opposite expects the charitable sector to pick up the tab for government responsibilities in the first place?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady clearly does not understand the charity sector, if that's the position she's taking. Having worked in it for 16 years, I'm not going to get lectured on this, because the provision actually, for example, the hospices that I worked in, what I found was they were able to respond to the needs of families in a much better way, more holistic way than perhaps the state sector could. So I'm very proud of the contribution that charities make to this country, and long may that continue.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
I recognise the enormous potential of AI, but also its risks. I've had extensive engagement with the creative sector on these issues, including a series of roundtables on AI with media, music and film representatives, among others. I'm now working very closely with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology on a programme of further engagement with the sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for that answer, but creators across the creative industries are really concerned about AI developers, some of whom are worth as much as $100 billion US dollars, using their works without consent and without compensation. And the government's working group's inability to agree a code of practice on AI and IP fuels concerns that the status quo is only working for the developers, and this is only going to be a growing problem. If the voluntary code isn't going to be possible, how will the government and her department particularly ensure that creators are going to be paid fairly when their work is exploited?
Well, I understand this issue and the concerns that my honourable friend has mentioned, and as of the Chair's Select Committee, I know that she understands and appreciates these issues. I want to assure her that the conclusion of the IPO working group is absolutely not the end of our work to find an appropriate regulatory solution for AI. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that AI development supports rather than undermines human creativity. For example, we will be focusing on ensuring greater transparency from AI developers and ensure that AI outputs are properly attributed. And it's also right, as she highlights, that creators should be compensated for their work.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Mr. Speaker, AI firms are committing large-scale abuse of copyrighted material, using copyrighted images and pieces of media to train their AI tools without the consent or compensation for copyright owners. The United Kingdom government says it wants to reduce barriers to AI companies, but this can only come at the expense of creators and artists. How does it make sense to sacrifice the 10% of UK GDP that comes from the creative sector in favour of less than 0.25% of GDP that AI produces?
Thursday.
I recognise the points that the honourable member makes in relation to the importance of protecting creative rights, that creative ingenuity that is such an important part of our British culture and economic value. And that's why I'm hearing from the sector. Not only that, that's why in the AI white paper that was published by the government, we recognise the importance on ensuring greater transparency from AI developers. And that is one of the things that we are continuing to work with across government.
Sheriff's Minister Sir Christopher Bryant.
I'm sorry, but the government's answer to the chair of the Select Committee was a load of hot air that, frankly, could have been written by ChatGPT, except they'd have done a better job of it. The truth of the matter is that the government's flagship on AI, as it relates to creative industries, which is meant to be protecting the moral and economic rights of artists, musicians and authors, whilst at the same time recognising the important advances that AI can bring, has sunk. And last June, the Secretary of State said that if the code of practice is not reached, legislation could be considered. So, in the words of Paul Simon, when is she going to make a new plan, Stan?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would just point out that the Labour Party have said absolutely nothing in relation to what it would do. So to stand up here and to say that we have no plan is absolutely unacceptable. But I can be absolutely clear that we do have a plan. We've worked very hard with the sectors. We have already set out in our white paper the steps that we will be taking on a very important aspect of this, which is in relation to transparency. And I am going to continue to work with the sector on all these areas to ensure that this extremely complex area comes to a satisfactory conclusion for the creative industries.
Question number 10, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 10 and 16 together. The limits for society lotteries allow them to raise funding for charities but remain distinct from other forms of gambling and from the National Lottery. The limits were last increased recently in 2020, but I am aware of some operators want to see the limits raised or removed entirely. It is important that any decisions that are made are based on strong evidence, and as such I have commissioned research in this area, which I hope we'll review by the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that answer. The People's Postcode Lottery funds some brilliant organisations across Batley and Spen, including the fantastic Rainbow Baby Bank in Hetman-Dwight and Game Changers Youth Provision in Birstall. However, the current sales limits prevents the People's Postcode Lottery from giving away even more grants in worthy community organisations across the country and indeed in all our constituencies. So could the Minister therefore explain why casinos and bookies, for example, don't face the sales limit, but charity lotteries, which are low risk and fund so many valuable local charities, do face this barrier?
Minister.
Well, as I said, at the reception that the postcode lottery, People's Postcode Lottery had the other night, it was my privilege to set up a society lottery when I worked in a hospice, and I do recognise the value that they bring for charities, and I'm aware of the issues that PPL have raised. But I have worked with the Gambling Commission to suggest ways that they can grow under the current network, as they are the largest brand in this sector. But as I say, I do want to see more research. We need to understand what are the potential harms, what are the potential effects on the National Lottery. There isn't enough data out there at the moment. That's why I'm commissioning that independent research so that we can make decisions based on evidence.
Jeremy Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, in my vast and far-flung constituency, it is difficult for charities to raise money, as the House can imagine. And to date, some £432,000 of community grants has been awarded to these charities. That's very welcome indeed. So, the Minister has mentioned that consideration will be given to raising the limits or perhaps abolishing them altogether. Could I make an impassioned plea that the particular circumstances of remote parts of the UK are brought into the consideration when these decisions are made?
I absolutely recognise the vast contribution that these lotteries make to charities that work in particularly rural areas, and of course we will make sure that the evidence is looking at all of those issues. But I'm sure he would agree with me that we want to make sure we're developing policy based on evidence, but that does not detract from the fact that we do recognise the enormous work that these lotteries do, and we're incredibly grateful to them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 11.
Mr. Speaker, the Government has committed over £325 million to multi-sport grassroots sites across the whole of the UK. This is part of our mission to ensure that every community has the pitches and facilities that it needs. So far, 2,300 sites have been supported. That includes funding for grass pitch maintenance at Waveney Football Club in my honourable friend's constituency, creating many more opportunities for people of all backgrounds to get active.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer. The development of grassroots multi-sports facilities are very often led by one sport, who then face a variety of obstacles in getting other sports authorities to participate in a particular project. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to remove these barriers and to promote collaboration between different sports authorities so that much needed facilities can be built?
Secretary.
Well, I welcome my honourable friend's question because it allows me to champion the fact that as a requirement of the government's investment into grassroots facility, we require that 40% of projects need to clearly benefit a sport other than football, such as cricket, rugby, basketball or netball. And in England, the Football Foundation and Sport England work closely with the national governing bodies of other sports to encourage development of multi-sport projects to promote collaboration between clubs at a local level.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 1 million girls lose interest in sports when they become teenagers, mainly due to lack of confidence and feeling judged. But we know how beneficial sports is for mental health and many other benefits. So how has the department included gender in the implementation of the multi-sports grassroots facilities programme?
Well, I welcome that question as well, because we have a national sports strategy to get 3.5 million people more active, and that is particularly focused on trying to get those who are currently inactive into sport. And as my honourable friend rightly mentions, women and girls are less active in sport than boys and men. So we're particularly focusing on that with a national task force which brings together all departments that are relevant, as well as the national governing bodies, in order to ensure that we get more women and girls involved in sport across the board.
Barry.
Mr. Speaker, would the Secretary of State accept that grassroots sports can play a hugely important part in levelling up? As part of the Darwin £120 million town deal, we've invested in our football club, our cricket club, our skate park, and we're about to open a brand new five-a-side pitch. Will she commit to go and talk to the Secretary of State for levelling up to see what part her department can play to ensure that sport plays its proper part in enriching the cultural lives of people in areas that have a levelling up bid?
Secretary of State.
My right honourable friend is a huge champion for his area and for the North in general, and he's absolutely right that sport, drama, creativity, all these things level up an area, and I'm very happy to talk to my right honourable friend in the Levelling Up Department to consider how together across government we can continue to support the North.
Richard Ford.
Mr. Speaker, I've visited sports clubs recently in Honiton, including youth rugby, gymnastics, football. They're all seeking support from the local authority, East Devon District Council, on the basis of their 2017 sports pitch strategy. Now, while the government's multi-sport grassroots facility programme is very welcome, does the Minister consider that it is generous enough for youth sport, given that the co-benefits it can have for young people of a sense of camaraderie, good health and civic pride?
Our strategy is helping sport across the board, but I particularly recognise the importance of young people getting involved in sport. And we have invested around £1 billion in sport for young people, whether that's our £300 million on our multi-sport pitches or whether it's the £600 million in schools to get more children the required amount of time of 2 hours of PE. And we're investing across the board in youth service as well to get more young children active in constructive activities rather than those that are less appropriate.
Can we stop to Sarah Dyke?
Question number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Number 1. Secretary of State. Number 1.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud of our government's record in supporting the creative industries. Figures published last week, which I'm sure the opposition benches will welcome, show that our powerhouse creative industries grew by 6.8% in 2022, generating an enormous £124 billion for UK PLC, putting us ahead of our target to meet our ambition to grow these sectors by an extra £50 billion by 2030. Of course, much of that depends on the amazing talent of Britain, but many of those are also benefiting from government's targeted tax breaks, which are powering the creative industries.
All right. Sarah Dyke.
Speaker, I thank the Minister for her response. Does she agree with me, though, that we need to support local initiatives to encourage more girls specifically into sport and to remain in sport and back into sport? I myself enjoyed a long and prosperous rugby career playing in National Premiership 1. So will she congratulate me in encouraging Somerton RFC in their new girls' rugby skills and social nights?
Absolutely, more girls should have the opportunity to play sports which are traditionally the preserve of the boys. And that's why we are encouraging all schools to offer all sports to all their pupils, whatever their gender. But in addition to that, we are backing women's football, £30 million to 30 pitches across the country where girls will have priority access, because it's absolutely right that we continue to encourage girls and women to take up more sport.
Sir Robert Lee.
Gainsborough once was capital of England under the incomparable Sweyn Forkbeard. It is an historic market town with the old hall at its heart. What plan does the government have to preserve the character of historic market towns like Gainsborough?
Minister.
I thank him for raising the beauty and heritage of Gainsborough. Heritage, of course, has a vital role to play in levelling up and can act as a powerful catalyst in increasing opportunities and prosperity. We recognise the opportunity that those historic high streets give us, and we have a £95 million High Street Heritage Action Zone programme, which drives the regeneration of 67 of our towns and cities. And I believe that Gainsborough has also been a previous recipient of heritage lottery programmes, and also we have a scheme to help with historic churches.
SNP spokesperson John Nicholson.
Thank you. Coverage of yesterday's Commons chaos showed how desperately we need good quality journalism. So I'm concerned with BBC Scotland's request to Ofcom for a reduction in their broadcast news output, and especially the loss of the Nine. BBC Scotland TV News had something of a couthy image until the Nine came along, placing Scottish news in the context of UK and international news. It was a compromise offering for those who wanted a Scottish Six on BBC One. Although the Nine created a pathway for young talent, I said at the time that its slot tucked away on a channel many struggle to find could be its undoing, and now it's being pulled. In an election year, we need more scrutiny of politicians, not less. The need for a properly resourced Scottish Six remains. I hope Ofcom will say no to these proposals. I know the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Angus Robertson, opposes this reduction in news output. Does the Minister?
Minister.
Well, I am aware that the BBC is looking at changing its programme mix in relation to news in Scotland. My understanding was that was cost neutral, but I hear what he says. I appreciate that he has some concerns about that. He will also be aware that we don't hold direct power over the BBC about that programming mix. I'm sure that the Director-General has heard his concerns. As I say, I think they are still investing in quality news content in Scotland, but it may be that the mix is changing and he is clearly unhappy about that.
Mary Robinson.
Mr Speaker, Cheadletown FC have been members of the North West Counties Football League since 1983. However, the oversubscribed division leaves Cheadletown and other South Manchester clubs at risk of being moved laterally into a Midlands division. With the significant increase in the club's travel cost, impact on Gates, breaking their northern identity as a northern club and challenging their future viability, I've met with the FA and raised their concerns. Will my right honourable friend now join me in urging the FA to review their processes and listen to South Manchester clubs who want to keep their teams northern?
I know that my honourable friend is a massive champion for her area, and she's raised this issue with me and with the Sports Minister. Levels 5 to 10 of the English Football League system are administered, as she rightly recognised, by the FA, and decisions regarding which league a team plays in at this level are for the FA in their role as governing body. But I'm sure the FA is listening to her concerns and will have heard her plea this morning.
Spokesperson Barbara Keeley. Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've raised with the Treasury Minister in the House this week that serious delays in HMRC issuing A1 forms mean that touring musicians are waiting months to be paid. A1 forms ensure that musicians do not have to pay additional tax when touring in the EU, but some musicians are now waiting 6 to 9 months or even a year for the forms. One leading singer told me that musicians feel like hostages of HMRC incompetence. So what is the Secretary of State doing alongside Treasury Ministers to sort out this mess, which is hitting UK musicians so hard?
State.
I recognise the importance of touring to many of our fantastic industries, and we have got bilateral agreements with many other countries to ensure that touring can take place, but I will continue to ensure that we take every step as a government across the board to ensure that our musicians can tour appropriately.
And the cut.
Much, Mr Speaker. What assessment has the Minister made of the BBC's proposals to launch
4 new national music radio stations and to relaunch an existing station, 5 Live Sports Extra. To my mind, they are a direct imitation of commercial broadcasters' innovation. And the time and resource the BBC are investing could be better spent in reversing the cuts to BBC local radio, a source of distinctive public service content that is not available anywhere else on the same medium.
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a stalwart of the radio scene, and I would like to pay tribute, if I may, to the 40-year career of Steve Wright, who is also a stalwart of BBC Radio. In relation to the issue that he speaks of on the launch of new radio services, I have spoken to the Director General about this, and he is also very, very aware of the strength of feeling in this House about the local radio proposals. The mid-term review does say that the BBC should engage much more closely with the market ahead of the launch of any new stations, but there is also powers that Ofcom has to make a judgment on this before a new station is launched.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the Government has moved to repeal Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act, there remains no legislative measures to convince print media to sign up to the state regulator. So how does the Government plan to finally give the state regulator the power to do its job as called for by the National Union of Journalists?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very proud that we have a free press, and I think it's really important that we do repeal Section 40 to ensure that there isn't a chilling effect on our reporting. But of course, since that was first proposed, we've had greater self-regulation, and I'm sure that the press will continue to ensure that they do their outstanding job in an appropriate fashion.
Pickleball as a national sport, and will the Sports Minister come to the Dunstable Hunters Pickleball Club, where he'll see men, women, grandparents and grandchildren having a wonderful time?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, how can I possibly resist such an invitation? And I know that this is actually, I mean, people are laughing, but this is actually becoming it's a more and more popular sport. So for me, anything that gets people active and enjoying sport can only be a positive. So I'm happy to come and see it in action.
Neil Lamley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the annual sales limit on the People's Postcode Lottery, the Minister says that he wants to have some evidence as to why that an additional increase is necessary. Well, since the advent of the pandemic, funding and fundraising has become under increasing pressure, and that has led to charities in my constituency closing. Sage Scotland, a domestic violence charity, was unable to access funding, so the need and the evidence is there for everyone to see. And I wonder if he would at least consider an additional uplift in the interim to the upper sales limit so that charities can access meaningful funding and are not forced to close down because of a lack thereof.
Well, I think it's important to put on the record that for almost every other lottery, society lottery, they were nowhere near those limits. But I do recognise that for some of the individual trusts within the People's Postcode Lottery, it may be getting tight. But we have been speaking with the Gambling Commission to see what else they can do to perhaps use some of the other trusts that they have at their disposal to increase that funding. But I take on board the points that he's making.
Sir Michael Fabric.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that individual sports clubs have a role to play in providing youth services? And in that respect, can I thank the government actually for funding the Lichfield Sports Club and Chasetown Football Club, who've both received grants for the work that they do, grants that reach up to £2.5 million.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and he is a fabulous champion for Lichfield, and I'm pleased that the young people in Lichfield are getting the benefit of government funding in his area.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government's promise to protect music creators from the potential negative impacts of artificial intelligence relied upon a deal between tech companies and the music industry. However, it has emerged that earlier this month, those discussions have collapsed. So will the Secretary of State admit that their plan has failed, and what is the government going to do about it to support the creative sector?
State.
I wish that the Labour Party opposite actually read our white paper in relation to AI, because in that white paper we recognise the importance of this issue, the importance of protecting the creative industries, and we have set out in that paper, which I recommend that they actually read, we have set out what we are doing on a particular issue in relation to transparency, which is of a key issue, and we of course are continuing to work with both sides of the industry, whether that's the AI tech giants or whether that's the creators, to ensure that we come to an appropriate resolution of this issue.
Sir Bretliff.
Speaker, and can I refer members to my register of interest? Can the Minister please update us on the independent regulator, and can he quite literally get the ball rolling to get this bill in front of the House?
Well, my honourable friend has been a doughty campaigner when it comes to the issue of football regulation, and it was good for me to... Sorry? Do you know, I was told that the honourable gentleman was a difficult man to ignore, but it's always worth trying. I am, don't you worry.
Conversation could carry on afterwards,
Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend has done a lot of work in this area. We are absolutely committed to introducing the recommendations of the white paper that we published, and the bill will be published shortly.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chair of Girl Guiding UK has recently informed me that with government funding, girl guiding can at least be sustained in 3 overseas military bases. So will the Minister update me on his discussions to ensure that these girls living on UK overseas military bases can continue to access girl guiding?
Minister.
Well, I know the Honourable Lady has done a lot of work in this area, and we had a really good Westminster Hall debate on this. I would point out that, of course, the Girl Guiding is an independent organisation, and it is for them to make their own organisational directional decisions, but as a department, we're working closely with FCDO and the MOD and Girl Guiding and representatives from overseas territories to see if we can come up with a solution.
Sir Christopher Chubb.
Mr. Speaker, what is the government doing to promote the facilities for paddle tennis?
Yeah.
So we're working very closely. We work very closely with national governing bodies like the Lawn Tennis Association, for example. They have actually done some amazing work, training 17,000 teachers across the country to teach tennis and paddle tennis, etc. And I went to see it myself recently at the National Centre. I'm not doing very well here, I know that. But he does raise a very important point, and I will continue to raise it with the national governing body in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been a number of late postponements of football matches recently, causing massive inconvenience and putting many fans, including Barnsley Football Club fans, seriously out of pocket. I've suggested to the English Football League that they adopt a postponement promise that would stop this from happening. Will the Minister work with me on this?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman raised a really important point, and I've heard this from fans in my own constituency, and it's an issue that obviously we will have a discussion. It's a decision for football, but I'll be happy to raise that with the varying leagues, because I do recognise the impact that it has on fans up and down the country.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend share my concern that the large number of inquiries Ofcom have launched against GB News for conducting itself in exactly the same fashion as other channels routinely do, is in danger of looking biased and political, and Ofcom are in danger of putting themselves in judicial review territory?
I am, and the government is in favour of media plurality, and it's really important that we have different channels that express different views across our vast political landscape. I'm very pleased that GB News has chosen to be regulated by Ofcom, and I know that Ofcom carries out its job appropriately.
We now come to oral questions with the South West Bedfordshire Representative Church Commissioners, Honourable Member for Bloxburn, representing the House of Commons Commission. Barry Sherman.
Question number 1.
Done. Barry Sherman. Got it. Well, Andrew Sullivan. No, Charles Walker.
With your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to read quite a long answer into the record.
It is essential that members and their staff can perform their parliamentary duties safely and securely, both on and off the estate. This is something the Commission considers to be of the highest importance. Members should report immediate threats to the police on 999. Members can report any other threats, whether online, on the street, or in their constituency, to the Parliamentary Liaison and Investigations Team of police officers based on the estate. The House administration recognises that threats and intimidation can impact MPs' emotional health and well-being. The Parliamentary Health and Wellbeing Service offers direct psychological support for members, such as counselling and a confidential helpline, and assistance to family members who live with a Member of Parliament. Occupational health experts in the team are always on hand to support members who might have been subject to threat. In terms of security measures, while we do not discuss these on the floor of the House, I can confirm that the Parliamentary Security Department supports members with a range of other processes which are kept under continuous review. I shall briefly cover these, Mr. Speaker, then come to the close. It provides protection at members' homes and constituency offices and can provide security operatives for constituency surgeries and members' other parliamentary duties off the estate. It gives members tailored advice for their individual circumstances. This includes security and situational awareness training, which is available to all MPs, their families and staff. Members can access hands-on cybersecurity advice for their personal mobile phones. A team monitors social media and other open source sites for threats to Parliament or members. As a member of the Consultative Panel on Parliamentary Security, this is a cause close to my heart and one that I will continue to champion as a member of that commission.
Mr. Speaker, some members of the House will know that I had a death threat. A gentleman was arrested and went into a mental institution. When he was released, the House authorities and the Met Police met me and said, this gentleman is now out and he knows where you live. I listened very intently to what the Honourable Gentleman said, but that's the last I heard. And I'm a person now that watches where he walks, doesn't stand by the side of the tube, alter my way of coming into the House. It is very stressful. And I have to say, all that's been said by the Honourable Gentleman, I know he believes it and I know he's passionate about it, but it doesn't feel like there's very much there on the receiving end.
Well, can I thank the gentleman for giving me advance notice of his question. I am so sorry that he has experienced this after giving more than 40 years of service to this Parliament and this country. I will endeavour to meet with the Honourable Gentleman next week with security officials to go through his concerns one by one, and I hope to see him at a meeting next week. If he's...
Greg Smith.
Number 2, sir.
Salute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'll group questions 2 and 5. And before I reply to my honourable friend for Buckingham, could I pass on my condolences, and I'm sure those of the whole House, to the family and friends of Alan Wilson, the Bishop of Buckingham, who died suddenly last Saturday. There is comprehensive advice on the Church of England website to all parishes about how to keep buildings secure, which we regularly update. All buildings used for religious worship are also eligible for the Home Office's Hate Crime Protection Scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join my honourable friend in passing my condolences to the family of the late Bishop of Buckingham. On the subject of theft from churches, vicars tell me this is a continuing problem in my constituency and that the insurance sector are now demanding that churches must be locked unless someone from the church is present inside. That clearly creates a big challenge for those wanting a moment of quiet prayer or reflection or to just enjoy the beauty of our historic churches. So, can my honourable friend tell me what the Church Commissioners are doing with the insurance sector to ensure our churches can remain, whilst secure, open for quiet prayer and reflection?
Andrew Slew.
Well, I'm very sorry to learn the experience of my honourable friend's constituency, and I can tell him that he's completely right about the importance of keeping churches open for those who want to come. And the good news, actually, is that keeping churches open increases footfall, and that actually deters criminals, and locking up churches is actually a poor deterrent to thieves. But I can also tell him that funding for roof alarms was provided by the Diocese of Oxford back in 2019 when there was a spate of thefts from church roofs in his area. So I'd encourage churches in his constituency to contact the diocese again to see whether this might be made available.
Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his answer thus far. He will recall that I previously at these Church Commissioner questions asked about thefts from churches in my constituency and my neighbouring constituencies at St John's and St Andrews, where at St Andrews the theft took place during the Mass, which is outrageous, to put it mildly. But the police advice is not, and the police support is not being listened to by the Church Commissioners, in my view. What needs to happen is that churches should get at least the same support and assistance from the police as other places of worship. So will he use his good offices to go back to the Church of England and ensure that there's dialogue between the police and the church to protect our churches as places of worship?
Well, I'm very sorry to learn of those concerns from my honourable friend, and I will certainly feed that straight back to the hierarchy of the church and make sure that those meetings do happen. However, I am pleased to be able to tell my honourable friend that following his question to me on this issue last month, the police have arrested a suspect for a series of church burglaries in Barnet, Brent and Harrow, and he's remanded in custody. And I've been told that the Metropolitan Police are in close contact with the Diocese of London and with local churches, but there clearly needs to be more dialogue, and I will make sure that that does happen.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I had the pleasure of visiting the Holy Trinity Church at Dunkeswell. It sits on the site of the Cistercian Dunkeswell Abbey in my constituency. And visiting it is a very moving spiritual experience. So can he assure us that, given that some of these sites are in very rural, very remote areas where there simply will never be the footfall that he describes, that we can continue to keep those open in spite of any threat of theft?
Well, I completely understand the point which the honourable gentleman makes, and like him, I'm a lover of our rural churches as well. I think I would just suggest that he points the church wardens and the priests to that quite comprehensive advice on the Church of England website, and perhaps have further conversations with the diocese and the local police. And if there are still issues, then I'd ask him to come back to me about it.
Jim Shum.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Church Commissioner for that answer. We live in an age where modern technology is available but is incredibly expensive as one of the methods of trying to address the issue. So what funds are issued through the Barnet Consequentials for us in Northern Ireland to ensure that churches can adequately secure buildings through security cameras and CCTV? And if there is currently no funding available, could this be considered when we take into account the rural and isolated status of so many church and buildings?
Well, I'm sorry to tell my honourable friend that I don't think, as far as I'm aware, that this area is covered by Barnet Consequentials. But I would again direct my honourable friend to the advice on the Church of England website, which can be seen by churches in Northern Ireland. And if there are particular issues, I'm very happy to have a quiet conversation with him in the tea room to see how we can share best practice to try to help his churches.
Number 3, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'll answer questions 3, 4 and 6 together. Both archbishops have offered to meet the Home Secretary, and the Church has provided advice and guidance for clergy to consider when dealing with requests for baptism from asylum seekers. The guidance does refer to the need for discernment and recognises that there may be mixed motives on the part of asylum seekers requesting baptism.
Mr. Speaker, could I welcome that meeting? Those who are genuinely seeking to